Choosing a vehicle with a manual transmission gives you a very different driving experience than you would have with an automatic car. Some might argue that knowing how to drive a manual is a fundamental test to determine if someone is a true driver or just an enthusiast who doesn't know much about cars. However, the way you handle or don't handle a car with a manual transmission will not only have a significant impact on the useful life of your vehicle, but could also affect your own life. There are a series of fatal mistakes you need to avoid when operating a car with a manual transmission, from lazily handling the gear shift to modifications that can be deadly, and even driving skills that are deficient, poor, or simply non-existent. There are countless ways you can ruin your manual transmission. So, here I bring you 7 things you should never do when driving a car with a manual transmission. So let's get started. The first mistake you should never make is never rest your left foot on the clutch pedal. Many drivers have a tendency to rest their left foot on the clutch pedal, and let's put this in the simplest terms possible. Even when you think you're not applying any pressure to the pedal, there definitely is, however minimal it might be. There's a mechanical response on the other side of the system, and it's one of the worst things you can do while driving a manual or mechanical transmission car. This will cause slight engagement or disengagement in your transmission's flywheel, creating friction with the clutch disc. This will generate a lot of heat in your manual transmission and, of course, premature wear. Resting your left foot on the clutch pedal, no matter how little pressure it seems to have, will also cause the transmission's throwout bearing to be in constant contact with the flywheel when it's spinning at very high speeds, creating friction where there shouldn't be friction. Over time, all you will achieve is the appearance of strange noises, and ultimately a broken manual transmission where usually the first thing to fail is your clutch disc, which can be quite expensive to replace. And that's not all where it hits your pocket. It also worsens fuel efficiency. Plus, it's quite a dangerous habit because in some vehicles, especially lower-end ones, this excess friction can cause a fire in your transmission, literally flames that could end up with a car catching fire. You should never leave your car in neutral when parked. When you drive an automatic car, do you put it in neutral when you stop? Why do you think you don't put it in neutral but instead put it in park? Because when you put it in park, you are literally locking it as if you were setting a manual car in second gear. It's common for people to leave it in neutral and with the handbrake or emergency brake engaged. It's very possible and happens often, especially with older cars, where the emergency brake might fail, and if you didn't leave the manual transmission engaged in second gear, your car will just roll freely with the wind. You can leave it in first, second, reverse, or any of these gears, keeping it engaged. This way, you'll save yourself a mini heart attack and a lot of money. Pay special attention to this if you drive a manual car with an electronic handbrake or emergency brake, as those brakes tend to fail a lot. It's always advisable to leave the car engaged if it's manual in this case. Another detail to consider, especially with manual cars, is when you're parking on an incline or decline. Did you know that the direction you turn your wheels can make all the difference? If you're parked facing uphill, turning your wheels away from the curb can prevent the car from rolling into traffic if the handbrake fails. On the other hand, if you're parked facing downhill, turning the wheels toward the curb can stop the car from rolling forward. This, combined with leaving your car in gear, adds an extra layer of safety and minimizes risks, especially in tricky situations. Next mistake, not fully pressing the clutch pedal. Yes, this happens very commonly when you're learning to drive. One of the most typical mistakes is not pressing the clutch pedal all the way down, and what happens is you feel a disturbing sound, as if everything inside the transmission is being destroyed. This, besides alarming, causes the gear to take longer to engage or not to engage correctly. Of course, this kind of practice is not at all healthy for a manual transmission, and if you don't correct this habit, you could be facing costly repairs sooner than expected. Now, this error does not only affect novice drivers, but happens a lot to those accustomed to driving automatic cars as well. A typical example is when they start well, shift to second without issues, but when trying to put it into third, they forget to press the clutch pedal. Suddenly, there's that strange noise that seems to come from the bowels of the vehicle, and although in some cases you might manage to get the gear in, you've already caused some minor damage to the transmission. It might not be visible immediately, but over time, these practices can add up and charge you. The good news is that car manufacturers are fully aware that this kind of mistake can happen. In fact, it's something that anyone with a manual gearbox will experience at some point, be it due to a slip, nerves, or simply lack of experience. It's for this reason that manual transmissions are designed to withstand within certain limits these kinds of situations without immediately compromising. However, that margin of error doesn't mean you should abuse it. We must remember that, although these transmissions are relatively sturdy, they are not indestructible. If you constantly engage in this bad practice, wear will become evident over time. Not to mention those who watch too many YouTube videos and decide to emulate supposed drift experts who claim you can shift gears without pressing the clutch. Of course, they sell you the idea that you can do it very quickly, almost like having an automatic transmission with manual controls. But in reality, all you'll be achieving is drastically reducing the life of your transmission and exponentially increasing your chances of being stranded on the road. Another thing we should avoid is not having the car engaged in one of the gears when you're at a red light. It's possible that at some point you find yourself stopped at a red light and, out of habit or impatience, you keep your left foot pressing the clutch pedal while your vehicle is in first gear. At that moment, you're subjecting your vehicle's clutch to unnecessary stress. So you should consider the following. The transmission of a manual car isn't designed to keep the clutch pedal pressed for long periods of time. The mechanics of this system are designed for dynamic use, where the driver presses the clutch to change gears and then quickly releases it after selecting the appropriate gear. This cycle of pressing and releasing is how you give the transmission the opportunity to function without overload. Holding the clutch pedal down for a prolonged period, as can happen while waiting at a traffic light, not only adds extra wear to the flywheel and clutch disc, but also accelerates the aging of these critical components. Additionally, this habit can cause premature wear on the bearings and other internal elements of the transmission that are not designed to withstand this constant pressure. Therefore, the most recommended practice when stopping at a traffic light is to shift the gear lever to neutral and apply the handbrake or emergency brake. This way, you release the clutch. The fifth mistake is releasing the clutch too quickly. And this one is important for our racing friends because they need to know. Okay, you might be shifting gears at high speed, accelerating, pressing, accelerating. Well, one thing is doing that in a competitive situation on a racetrack or circuit, where it's truly necessary to go as fast as possible, and you're probably driving a vehicle with a transmission prepared for that stress. And another very different thing is pushing your Toyota Corolla or Volkswagen Jetta to city speed limits. If I release the clutch pedal too quickly to enter the next gear or the previous gear, all I'm doing is generating extreme friction between the clutch disc, the flywheel, and the vehicle's crankshaft. You've probably noticed when learning to drive a manual transmission that when you shifted gears, you released the brake too quickly, and it made the car jump. No, it didn't stall, but you jumped forward and backward because the shift was too abrupt. When you do this while moving and do it quickly, you don't notice that abrupt jump, but the same thing is happening, and all you'll achieve is breaking your clutch disc, or in the worst case, catching your clutch on fire much earlier than it should. The next mistake many make is never floor a car with a manual transmission when the RPMs are low. If I'm suddenly going 30 miles per hour in fifth gear and floor the pedal, all I'm doing is sending the vehicle's computer mixed and incorrect messages. Drive smoothly, urban, with moderate fuel injection to save fuel. But at the same time, the accelerator pedal is saying, work hard. This is known as flooding the engine. Of course, this is one of the most common causes of premature wear in cars with manual transmission. Although in this case, you're not destroying the transmission but the engine. The best thing to do if you find yourself in a similar situation is to gently press the accelerator and progressively increase the speed and RPM of the engine, or reduce speed to increase the RPM and thus access the power you're seeking. Shifting from fifth to fourth or fourth to third will help raise the engine's RPM, allowing you to be much more in line with the vehicle's performance you're seeking and better utilize the horsepower. The ideal in these cases would be to seek rev matching, a technique that will help you match the rotational speed of your transmission with that of the engine, allowing for a smoother and more powerful gear change, which is crucial for power generation in the vehicle. The last mistake is never coast down a hill in neutral. You might think this will save you some fuel, and of course it makes sense since I'm going downhill. Why not let gravity do the work instead of my engine burning fuel? But in fact, what happens, at least in modern cars, is the opposite. Modern cars are designed to save fuel even when a gear is engaged, simply cutting off the fuel supply when the car is going downhill. But what's important here is that when I'm coasting downhill in neutral, I'm putting myself in grave danger. It reduces my ability to control the vehicle, and I'll only have braking capability, not acceleration. So, in an emergency maneuver, I won't be able to do much, but speaking mechanically, the most important thing is that when in neutral, you cut off the transmission's oil supply, so the gearbox will keep operating because the car is still spinning, but it's not being lubricated, which can lead to very severe premature wear on your transmission. And it's the same with the engine, because as it will be running at its lowest possible RPMs since it's descending a hill, the oil pump will also be operating at its lowest injection capacity. So your vehicle is spinning fast, but the pump is lubricating little. As a result, the engine doesn't cool down as quickly as it should or lubricate as well as it should. So, when you shift into second or third gear to continue your journey after the decline, your engine is poorly lubricated and creating a lot of premature wear that can break many things. So, those were the 7 mistakes you should never make in a manual car. Driving a stick shift can be an incredible experience, but only if you take care of it as you should. Avoid these mistakes, and both your car and your wallet will thank you. Have you committed any of these errors? Or maybe you have a story about someone who did. Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to not miss more content like this. And if you want more, check out these 2 videos right here. See you in the next video.